Pretend to hug me, she whispered, unaware the stranger was a billionaire who'd change her life. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's return to our main character. Lena Moore stands just inside the glass doors of the Meridian Hall, fingers curled tight around the thin clipboard pressed to her chest, as if holding it there might keep her from being seen, or worse, from being remembered, because tonight she is not supposed to exist, not really. Just another temporary staff member in black flats and a borrowed blazer, assigned to smile, point directions, and disappear before anyone important notices her face. And yet the room feels too loud, too bright. Every chandelier reflecting off polished marble floors like 1,000 unblinking eyes, and the low hum of voices rolls over her in ways that make her breathing shallow, uneven, the way it always gets in crowded places where everyone seems taller, louder, more certain of their right to take up space. She tells herself it is only 4 hours, that she has done harder things for less money, that if she keeps her head down and follows the schedule printed in 12-point font, she will make it through the night without incident, without anyone asking her name, without anyone raising their voice, because Lena has learned that attention is rarely kind. Across the room, unseen by her, Julian Cross enters through a side corridor meant for catering and security, his coat plain, his posture controlled, the kind of man who knows exactly where his body is at all times, not because he wants to be admired, but because he has learned how quickly admiration turns sharp, and tonight he does not want to be recognized, not by reporters, not by investors, not by the people who think they know his story better than he does. So he keeps his head slightly lowered, eyes forward, moving like a shadow along the edges of the crowd. The first crack in Lena's careful plan comes when raised voices echo near the main stage, a minor delay, someone demanding answers, and the crowd shifts suddenly, bodies pressing closer together, the air growing warmer, heavier, and Lena feels that familiar tightening in her chest, the warning sign she never talks about, the one she hides behind polite nods and quiet apologies. She steps back, then back again, until her shoulders brush against someone solid, unfamiliar, and when she turns, her mouth opens to apologize out of habit, but the words catch, because the man behind her is not looking at her like she is in the way. He is looking at her like he sees the panic she is trying so hard to fold into herself. And in that suspended second, as a burst of camera flashes explodes somewhere to their left, and the noise spikes into something unbearable, Lena leans closer. Without thinking, her voice barely a breath against the rush of sound, and she whispers, "Please, pretend to hug me." Lena Moore did not plan to remember the sound of his breathing, but later, when the night replays itself against the inside of her skull, that is what comes back first, slow and steady, grounding, like a hand pressed gently against the small of her back, and for a few suspended seconds, the chaos around them fades into something distant and harmless, until the flashes move on and the pressure in her chest loosens just enough for her to step away, murmur a quiet thank you, and disappear back into the flow of staff before either of them can say anything more. This is how Lena survives most things, by slipping out before moments can demand too much from her, by returning to the version of herself that wakes up early in a studio apartment that smells faintly of old coffee and laundry detergent, where the walls are thin and the radiator clicks like it is counting time, where she eats toast standing by the sink and tells herself she is lucky to have work at all. Before the Meridian Hall, before the lights and the noise, her world is small and carefully measured, a series of temporary jobs, event shifts, assistant roles that never quite turn permanent, because permanence requires being seen, and being seen has never felt safe. She learned that years ago, back when raised voices meant slammed doors and attention meant blame, when the easiest way to keep the peace was to stay quiet and useful and invisible. So now she is very good at following instructions, at wearing neutral colors, at blending into the background until people forget she was ever there. The morning of the event, she double-checks the email 3 times, the address, the time, the dress code, black shoes, no logos, hair neat, Because mistakes cost money and money costs stability, and stability is the only luxury she allows herself to want. She arrives early, badge clipped on, listens while the coordinator runs through last-minute changes, nodding even when the words blur together, because she knows the rhythm of this job, the way stress rolls downhill, the way the smallest person absorbs the most pressure. Across the city, in a glass and steel building overlooking the river, Julian Cross prepares for the same night, with an entirely different kind of restraint, shrugging into a plain coat instead of the tailored suits waiting and used in his closet, instructing his driver to take the long route, entering the event through a service corridor to avoid the attention he knows will follow if anyone realizes he is there. Because lately attention has not meant admiration, it has meant speculation, accusations, headlines that flatten a life into something sharp and unreadable. He has learned how quickly people decide who you are once they know what you own, how quickly kindness turns transactional, how every glance comes with an angle, and so he has started choosing spaces where no one looks twice, places where he can observe without being observed, where he can exist without performing. That is how he notices Lena before she notices him, standing near the edge of the room, shoulders slightly hunched, eyes always tracking exits, not bored, not careless, just cautious. The way someone is when they expect the ground to shift beneath them at any moment. He recognizes that posture because he has worn it himself, back when he was building something fragile and could not afford mistakes, back when the future depended on reading rooms quickly and keeping emotions hidden. He does not know her name, does not know her story, only that when the crowd surges and the noise spikes and fear flashes across her face like a crack in glass, she does not ask for help loudly, she does not call for security or make a scene. She leans in and whispers, and something in that quiet request cuts through him in a way the flashing cameras never could. Later, long after Lena has returned her badge and stepped back into the cool night air, long after Julian has slipped away through the same side corridor he entered, both of them carry the moment forward without knowing why. A brief intersection that does not fit neatly into either of their lives, the kind of small, unresolved thing that should be easy to forget and yet refuses to be. Because some connections do not announce themselves as important at first, they linger, waiting, asking silently what will happen next. Lena expects the memory of that night to fade the way most shifts do, blurring into a general sense of exhaustion and relief once the paycheck clears. But instead it sharpens over the next few days, surfacing at odd moments, like when she is waiting for the bus or folding receipts at a temp desk downtown. The feeling of steady arms, the strange calm that followed. And what unsettles her most is not the contact itself, but how quickly her body trusted it, how instinctively she leaned into something solid without knowing who it belonged to. She tells herself it was situational, that anyone would have reacted the same way under pressure, that it means nothing. Yet the lie does not settle comfortably, because Lena is careful with herself, with space and touch and expectations, and that night bypassed all her rules. Her routine resumes, early mornings, neutral clothes, polite smiles, but there is a new awareness threaded through it, a quiet question she does not let herself ask fully, only circles around, wondering why a stranger chose to stay still when it would have been easier to step away. Meanwhile, the world Julian moves through begins to close ranks again, emails stacking up, assistants asking for confirmation, board members requesting his presence at a follow-up meeting connected to the Meridian event because his attempt to observe quietly did not go as unnoticed as he hoped. A leaked guest list, a photograph from a bad angle, whispers that he was there for reasons he has not explained, and suddenly the space he tried to occupy without weight collapses back into the familiar shape of authority. He reviews the event report, schemes past vendor notes and security updates, until a minor incident catches his attention, a staff complaint filed by a junior coordinator, describing a moment of confusion near the main hall, an employee absorbing blame to protect someone else from being reprimanded publicly, and he reads it twice, then a third time, recognizing the pattern before the name registers, Lena Moore. The power gap between them asserts itself quietly, not through money or commands, but through access, the way he can request context and receive it within minutes, the way her actions are reduced to a few lines in a document that crosses his desk without her knowing. and this imbalance unsettles him more than the cameras ever did. Lena is called into a small conference room 2 days later, told there will be a brief review related to the Meridian event, and the word review lands heavily, because reviews do not usually involve praise, and as she walks down the hallway, she measures each step, already preparing herself to accept fault, to apologize efficiently, to leave with dignity if necessary. She does not know who will be on the other side of the table, only that whoever it is will have the authority to decide whether she is useful or expendable, and that familiar tension coils in her stomach, the quiet math of power she has been doing her entire life. When Julian enters from a side door, she does not recognize him at first, dressed differently now, sharper, composed in a way that commands the room without effort, and it is only when his eyes lift and pause on her, holding for a fraction too long, that the connection snaps into focus, the same steady gaze, now framed by context she did not have before. The realization does not crash over her all at once. It seeps in, slow and disorienting, because the man who grounded her in the middle of chaos now sits at the head of the table, introduced with a title that changes the temperature of the air, and suddenly the hug becomes something else in her mind, reframed by hierarchy and consequence. She keeps her face neutral, answers questions carefully, unaware that Julian is watching the way she folds inward under scrutiny, the way she deflects credit, how she instinctively positions herself as a buffer between tension and others, and this observation deepens the divide he feels, the distance between the life he leads and the one she navigates daily. He realizes then that power is not always loud, that sometimes it is the simple fact of being believed, of being given space to exist fully, and that what he offered her that night was not protection but anonymity, a temporary suspension of judgment that allowed her to breathe. As the meeting ends and Lena is dismissed with a polite thank you, no resolution stated, she leaves with more questions than she arrived with, her heart beating faster not from fear alone, but from a fragile sense of betrayal she cannot quite justify, because the stranger she trusted was never just a stranger at all, and somewhere between the glass doors and the sidewalk, she wonders whether safety can exist alongside truth, or whether knowing who someone really is inevitably changes everything. Lena tells herself that the meeting is over, that whatever invisible judgment has been passed is done, but the sense of being pulled back into the orbit of that night refuses to let go, lingering as she walks home, as she unlocks her apartment, as she lies awake listening to the city hum outside her window, replaying the moment his eyes met hers across the conference table, not warm this time, not distant either, but measured, as if he were carefully choosing what to reveal and what to withhold. She does not sleep much, and when she does, she dreams of crowded rooms with no exits, of hands that reach for her and then vanish just before she can grab hold. Over the next week, her name appears on schedules more often than usual, reassigned to another high-profile event connected to the same network, the explanation vague, the tone polite, and Lena senses the shift immediately, the way opportunity often disguises itself as inconvenience, asking for flexibility without explaining why. She considers declining, but declining requires confidence she does not feel, so she accepts, reminding herself that work is work, that whatever happened at the Meridian Hall was an anomaly, not a pattern. The second event is smaller but more tightly controlled, an investor dinner hosted at a private venue. Less noise, more scrutiny, the kind of place where conversations happen behind lowered voices and every movement feels observed. Lena arrives early again, badge clipped on, shoulders squared, determined to be nothing more than efficient. But when Julian enters the room, this time openly acknowledged, greeted with deference that ripples outward, the memory of his arms around her presses unexpectedly against her ribs. He notices her at once, not because she stands out, but because she is deliberately trying not to, positioning herself near the wall, hands folded, eyes alert, and the familiarity of that posture makes something in him tighten. The inciting moment comes quietly, without drama, when a disagreement breaks out near the head table, a raised voice, an investor displeased with seating arrangements, the tension escalating just enough to draw attention, and Lena steps forward instinctively, smoothing the situation with practiced calm, absorbing frustration that is not hers, redirecting blame before it can land on someone more vulnerable. Julian watches this unfold from a distance, recognizing the cost of such reflexive self-sacrifice, the way it erodes a person slowly while being praised as professionalism, and something shifts from observation to decision. Later, as the evening stretches on and the guests grow more relaxed, he finds an excuse to cross the room, stopping near where Lena is organizing place cards, and the space between them feels charged in a way it did not before, heavy with unspoken context. He speaks first, his voice low, controlled, asking a neutral question about logistics, giving her the option to keep the exchange purely professional, and she answers carefully, her tone even, refusing to acknowledge the past that hovers between them like a held breath. Yet the awareness remains, threaded through every word, because neither of them can forget the way anonymity once existed between them, how easily it was shattered. As the night progresses, the pressure builds again, subtler this time, not from cameras but from proximity, from the knowledge that at any moment, someone might notice her, might ask how she knows him, might connect dots she does not want connected, and when a group of guests moves unexpectedly toward her corner of the room, blocking her path, the old panic flares hot and fast. She tries to ground herself, counting breaths, but the noise sharpens, her vision narrowing, and before she can stop herself, she glances toward Julian, not asking, not pleading, just searching. He does not hesitate. Without announcement or explanation, he steps into her space, positioning himself so that the crowd flows around them instead of through, his presence creating a pocket of quiet where she can breathe, and he does it with such ease that no one questions it, as if this is exactly where he is supposed to stand. This time, there is no whispered request, no pretense, only the silent understanding of what she needs and his choice to provide it without making her feel small. And in that moment, Lena realizes that the most dangerous part of this connection is not the imbalance of power, but the way he seems to see her clearly despite it. As the guests disperse and the room settles, he steps back just enough to give her space, his expression unreadable, and she is left with the unsettling awareness that whatever began with a whispered hug has now crossed into something more deliberate, something that cannot be undone, because once safety is offered twice, it starts to feel like a promise, and promises have consequences neither of them has yet named. Lena becomes aware of him in small, almost accidental ways after that night, not through grand gestures or direct conversations, but through the subtle shifts that follow when two people begin orbiting the same space with intention they refuse to name, because Julian does not seek her out openly, and she does not invite him to. Yet their paths keep aligning as if guided by an unseen hand. A pause in a hallway where he steps aside first, a quiet moment near the service elevator where he asks if she has eaten, the question framed as logistics, but carrying something gentler beneath it. She answers honestly, because lying would take more effort than she has left, and he nods once, committing the information to memory without comment. And later a boxed meal appears on the staff table with no note, just her name written neatly on the lid, an offering that does not ask for thanks. This is how the slow burn begins, not with declarations, but with restraint, with choices made carefully to avoid drawing lines they might later regret crossing. And Lena feels the tension in herself as a constant hum, the awareness that she is being seen without being claimed, protected without being possessed. She starts to notice details about Julian she had missed before, the way he waits until others finish speaking, how he positions himself so conversations do not corner people, how he listens with his whole body, shoulders angled, eyes steady, and it unsettles her because it contradicts the image she has carried of men with power, the ones who take without noticing, who fill rooms and leave others gasping. At the same time, Julian finds himself recalibrating around her, slowing his pace to match hers when they walk the same corridor, lowering his voice instinctively when he speaks to her, not because she asks, but because something in her responds to quiet, and he wants to honor that without making it obvious. They share moments that feel borrowed, standing side by side watching rain streak down tall windows, exchanging observations about the city without touching personal history, learning the shape of each other through edges rather than centers, and the restraint becomes its own kind of intimacy, a promise that what is not taken cannot be broken. Yet the imbalance remains, threaded through every interaction, because Lena cannot forget the way people straighten when he enters a room, The way his decisions ripple outward, while her own life still depends on schedules and approvals she does not control, and this awareness keeps her cautious, reminding her that closeness has consequences she may not be able to manage. Julian senses this distance and respects it, choosing patience over pursuit, because he knows how easily desire can feel like pressure when backed by authority, and the last thing he wants is for her to confuse his interest with obligation. Instead, he offers consistency, showing up the same way each time, calm, attentive, never demanding more than she volunteers, and this steadiness begins to recalibrate Lena's nervous system in ways she does not fully understand, teaching her that safety can exist without strings, that someone can remain present without expecting repayment. One evening, after another long event, they find themselves alone in a quiet service corridor, the building nearly empty, the echo of footsteps distant, and the silence between them stretches, comfortable but charged, filled with things unsaid. Lena breaks it with a simple observation about the night being easier than she expected, and Julian responds with a soft acknowledgement, telling her she handled herself well, not as a superior issuing praise, but as someone who genuinely noticed, and the validation lands heavier than she expects, stirring something vulnerable in her chest. She meets his gaze then, really looks at him, and for a moment the world narrows to just the two of them, the hum of lights overhead, the faint smell of cleaning solution, the shared understanding that whatever this is, it is growing in the quiet spaces between their words. Neither of them moves closer, yet the closeness is undeniable, a tension that promises both comfort and risk, because the more Lena allows herself to relax around him, the more she wonders what will happen when the truth of who he is collides with the parts of herself she has worked so hard to keep hidden, and the more Julian becomes aware that the calm he feels in her presence is not something he can compartmentalize forever, because slow burns do not extinguish themselves, they either deepen or demand a reckoning. And as they part ways that night without resolution, both carry the same unspoken question forward, wondering how long they can sustain this delicate balance before it tips into something neither of them can pretend is accidental anymore. Lena tells herself that equilibrium is possible, that she can continue navigating the careful distance she and Julian have maintained, but the turning point arrives without warning on a gray Tuesday morning when an email appears in her inbox requesting her presence at a company-wide briefing, mandatory attendance, conference room A, and the formality of it sends a ripple of unease through her, because mandatory meetings are rarely gentle. She arrives early, takes a seat near the back, hands folded in her lap, eyes scanning exits out of habit, while the room fills with staff, assistants, managers, people whose confidence seems to come from knowing exactly why they are there. The murmurs quiet when the doors open and Julian enters, not as the quiet presence from hallways and service corridors, but as the man everyone recognizes, the billionaire investor, the decision-maker, the name that carries weight, and the shift in energy is immediate, palpable, chairs straightening, spines aligning, attention snapping into focus. Lena feels it then, the full force of the power gap she has been skirting around, the way the room reorganizes itself around him, and with it comes a sharp, unexpected sting, because the safety she associated with his presence now feels reframed by hierarchy she cannot ignore. Julian begins to speak, his voice calm, measured, addressing recent changes, future direction, responsibility, and while his words are neutral, professional, Lena hears an undercurrent she cannot quite place, a careful selection of truths and omissions that mirrors the way he has handled their connection. As he talks, she realizes with a sinking certainty that this is the version of him the world knows, the one she was never meant to meet so closely, and the memory of his arms around her tightens painfully in her chest, because it now feels like something taken under false pretenses, even if no lie was spoken aloud. When he acknowledges the Meridian incident as a learning moment, referencing staff resilience and professionalism without naming names, a few people glance in her direction, and the attention makes her skin prickle, because praise delivered from that height feels different, heavier, like it binds her to a narrative she did not consent to. The emotional turning point crystallizes when the meeting ends and Julian steps down from the front, his gaze finding hers instinctively, holding for a fraction too long, and in that look she reads a question, an invitation, maybe even concern, but all she feels is the sharp need to protect herself. She stands quickly, slipping out before he can reach her, her pulse loud in her ears, the familiar urge to disappear reasserting itself with force. In the hallway, she presses her palm against the cool wall, breathing through the surge of feeling, trying to reconcile the man who whispered calm in her ear with the one who commands rooms. And the dissonance is too much, because both are real, and she does not know where she fits between them. Julian watches her retreat, the space she leaves behind charged with what he did not say. And for the first time since meeting her, he recognizes that his silence may have cost him something essential. He follows at a respectful distance, stopping short when he sees the way she folds inward, choosing restraint over impulse. But the decision weighs heavily, because he understands now that by not explaining sooner, by allowing her to discover his full identity in fragments, he has broken the fragile sense of safety they were building. Lena spends the rest of the day moving through tasks mechanically, answering questions, completing assignments. But inside she is recalibrating, drawing boundaries where none existed before, telling herself that whatever she felt was based on incomplete information, that trust requires clarity she was not given. As evening approaches, she gathers her things, determined to leave without another encounter. But fate, unkind and precise, places Julian in her path near the exit, the corridor quiet, the tension between them unmistakable. He speaks her name softly, stopping just far enough away to give her space. And in that moment she realizes that this is the point of no return, the moment where things must either be named or lost, because she cannot continue in the in-between, cannot accept comfort from someone whose power reshapes the ground beneath her without acknowledging the cost. She looks at him, really looks, and the warmth she once felt is now threaded with something sharper, a demand for honesty that frightens her as much as it steadies her. And as she turns away without responding, leaving him standing in the quiet hall, both of them understand that whatever happens next will redefine everything that came before, because once the truth is fully seen, it cannot be unlearned, and the choice of how to move forward becomes inevitable. Lena creates distance with precision after that day, not dramatically, not with accusations or scenes, but with the kind of careful withdrawal she learned long before Julian entered her life, answering emails succinctly, requesting reassignment when possible, adjusting her schedule so their paths cross less often, because distance feels safer than confrontation, and safety is the one thing she refuses to negotiate. Julian notices immediately, the absence louder than any argument could have been, the way she no longer lingers in shared spaces, no longer meets his eyes across a room, and the realization settles heavily that restraint, once protective, has now become a barrier he helped build. The misunderstanding deepens quietly, fed by assumptions neither of them voices, because Lena interprets his silence as confirmation that their connection was convenient, a moment of control disguised as care, while Julian believes he is respecting her boundaries, giving her space to regain equilibrium, unaware that the space feels to her like abandonment dressed up as courtesy. The next event arrives too soon, a public-facing gala with press attendance, the kind Julian cannot avoid, and Lena is assigned to assist with guest coordination near the main floor, the worst possible place for her to be if she wants to remain unseen. She considers calling out sick, but pride keeps her in place, the stubborn belief that she should not have to rearrange her life around discomfort, especially when she has done nothing wrong. The evening unfolds under bright lights and sharper scrutiny, cameras flashing, voices carrying, and Lena keeps her focus narrow, task-oriented, until a reporter corners her unexpectedly, mistaking her proximity for access, asking pointed questions about Julian, about rumors she does not fully understand, and the sudden attention triggers a familiar tightening in her chest. She deflects politely, but the exchange draws eyes, whispers, and Julian sees it from across the room. The way her posture changes, the way she braces, an instinct overrides strategy as he moves toward her. This is where the escalation sharpens, because his intervention, though well-intentioned, is public, unmistakable, his presence instantly shifting the dynamic, the reporter retreating, the crowd parting, and Lena feels the weight of his authority settle around her like a spotlight she did not choose. He thanks her for handling the situation professionally, his tone warm but formal, and the words land wrong, because spoken there, under those lights, they feel like a reminder of hierarchy, not care. She nods, says nothing, and steps away as soon as she can, her pulse racing, the sense of being managed rather than understood burning beneath her skin. Julian watches her go, the mistake dawning too late, because he realizes he has repeated the very pattern he promised himself he would avoid, using his power to smooth a situation without considering how it would feel from her side. The conflict peaks later that night in a quiet corridor away from the crowd, where Lena finally allows the tension to surface, not in raised voices, but in a controlled, brittle calm that frightens him more than anger would. She tells him she cannot be protected like an extension of his influence, that she does not want favors or shielding that come with unspoken expectations, that the hug she asked for was meant to be human, not transactional, and her words cut deep because they name his fear precisely. Julian listens, resisting the urge to defend himself, to explain intent instead of impact, and when he speaks, it is with uncharacteristic vulnerability, admitting that he did not know how to be both himself and someone safe for her at the same time, that he chose silence because he did not want to contaminate what they had with truth too heavy to carry lightly. The admission does not resolve anything, but it cracks the space between them open, because Lena hears the uncertainty beneath his control, recognizes the cost of his position, and still, she cannot ignore her own limits. She tells him she needs clarity, not proximity, honesty, not gestures, and until she has that, she cannot keep standing in the in-between, hoping he will choose the version of himself she met in the crowd. They part without resolution, the air thick with everything left unsaid, and as Lena steps back into the noise of the city, she knows the conflict has reached a point where avoidance will no longer work, because the more they circle each other, the more painful the orbit becomes. Julian remains where she leaves him, the echoes of her words settling in, understanding that the next move must be deliberate, that redemption, if it comes at all, will require him to relinquish control in a way he never has before, and the question that lingers, sharp and insistent, is whether he is willing to risk losing her in order to finally be honest, because without that choice, everything they have built will collapse under the weight of what it refuses to become. Lena does not expect to hear from Julian after that night, and when days pass without a message, without a carefully worded email routed through assistants, the silence confirms what she has already decided, that clarity often arrives not through explanations but through absence, and so she focuses on rebuilding the small, controllable pieces of her life, picking up extra shifts, organizing her calendar, reminding herself that she existed fully before him and will continue to do so after. The quiet climax arrives not with an invitation, but with an unexpected directive that reroutes her path one late afternoon, a request from the staffing coordinator asking her to cover a brief walkthrough at a private venue slated for renovation, a neutral task with no mention of guests, no mention of press, just a location and a time. She accepts because the work is simple and because simplicity feels necessary. When she arrives, the space is empty, stripped of the usual signals of power, bare concrete floors, high windows letting in pale light, the air cool and still, and for a moment she allows herself to breathe without bracing. Julian is already there, not at the center of the room, but standing near the edge, hands in his coat pockets, posture unguarded in a way she has never seen, and the absence of an audience changes everything, because without witnesses, there is no hierarchy to perform. He does not step closer immediately. He waits until she acknowledges him, until she chooses to close the distance herself by a few feet, a silent recognition that this meeting is different. He speaks plainly, without preamble, telling her he asked for the walkthrough to be reassigned to him, that he wanted a space where he could speak without the leverage of his position shaping the outcome, and the admission steadies something in her chest because it aligns action with intent. He does not apologize with grand language or excuses. Instead, he names specifics, the moments where he chose control over transparency, the ways he allowed her to piece together his identity without offering context, the times he intervened publicly when privacy would have been safer, and with each acknowledgement, the room seems to expand, making space for truth rather than tension. He tells her about the decision he made after their argument, the one that mattered most, the choice to step back from the project that placed him in her direct line of supervision, to remove himself from any structure where his authority could blur consent, because he realized that wanting her near while holding power over her was not protection, it was pressure, no matter how gentle it felt to him. The gesture is quiet, practical, irreversible, and it lands with more weight than any declaration could, because it costs him something real. Lena listens without interrupting, measuring not his words but the steadiness behind them, the way he holds eye contact without demanding response, the way he allows silence to exist without rushing to fill it. When she speaks, her voice is calm, grounded, telling him that safety, for her, has always been about predictability, about knowing where she stands and who she can rely on when the ground shifts, and that the night she whispered for a hug, she did not ask for a savior. She asked for a witness, someone willing to stand still with her in the noise. Julian nods, absorbing the distinction, and responds by telling her that he does not want to be the loudest thing in her life, that what he felt in that moment was not power but responsibility, the kind that does not announce itself, that simply shows up and stays. He does not ask her to decide anything, does not reach for her or close the remaining distance, because the choice matters more if it is hers alone. The quiet climax resolves not with an embrace, but with a shift in posture, as Lena relaxes her shoulders and steps closer of her own accord, not into his arms, but into shared space. And the proximity feels different now, balanced, intentional. She tells him she needs time, not to be convinced, but to recalibrate, to learn how to let someone see her without disappearing in the process, and he accepts this without resistance, offering patience as a practice rather than a promise. As they stand there, the light fades slowly through the windows, the city hum distant, and the moment lingers with a softness that suggests possibility without insisting on it, because sometimes the most profound turning points do not announce themselves with certainty. They simply leave the door open and wait to see who is brave enough to walk through. And as Lena leaves the building, she carries with her not an answer, but a sense of equilibrium restored, knowing that whatever comes next will be chosen, not assumed, and that choice, quiet and deliberate, is the beginning of something she has never had before. Lena does not rush the decision after that day, and the weeks that follow unfold quietly, marked not by dramatic turns, but by subtle confirmations that something fundamental has shifted, because Julian keeps his word without reminding her of it. No unexpected appearances, no messages carrying hidden expectations, just a steady absence that respects the space she asked for. And in that absence, Lena notices herself breathing easier, sleeping deeper, moving through her days without the constant vigilance that once defined her. They reconnect gradually, intentionally, in neutral spaces, a coffee shop near the river where neither of them has status, a walk through a public park where conversations blend into the ambient noise of life continuing around them. And these moments feel different from before, balanced, because nothing is borrowed now, nothing hidden behind circumstance. Julian listens more than he speaks, sharing pieces of his life without packaging them as explanations, telling her about the loneliness that comes with being surrounded yet untouched, about the way power isolates even as it amplifies, and Lena offers her own truths in return, about learning to disappear as a survival skill, about the fear that visibility always precedes loss. And with each exchange, the distance between them narrows not through proximity, but through understanding. The ending arrives softly, without ceremony, on an evening that mirrors the beginning in its simplicity, when they find themselves standing together outside a crowded venue, the noise spilling out into the street, the city alive and pressing in, and Lena feels that familiar tightening start to build, the old instinct to ask for help without being seen. She does not whisper this time. Instead, she turns to Julian and says clearly, "I am nervous," and the honesty steadies her, because naming fear gives it shape instead of power. Julian responds not by reaching for her immediately, but by asking, "Do you want me to stay close, or do you want space?" And the question matters more than the answer, because it centers her choice. She smiles then, a small, genuine curve of her mouth that surprises her with its ease, and says, "Stay." And when he wraps an arm around her shoulders, the gesture is neither rescue nor pretense, just presence offered and accepted. They stand there for a moment, the crowd moving around them, and the echo of that first whispered request lingers like a closed loop, transformed by time and truth into something sturdier. The surprise is not that Julian is a billionaire, because that truth has long since settled into the background, but that he chooses to live differently because of what he learned with her, stepping back from roles that reinforce imbalance, investing quietly in programs that prioritize consent and equity, changes that reflect a man reshaped not by romance alone, but by accountability. Lena continues building her life as well, accepting a permanent position that values her competence without demanding her silence, learning to occupy space without apology, carrying with her the knowledge that safety does not have to be temporary or conditional. Their relationship does not resolve into a fairy tale, but into something rarer, a partnership grounded in choice, clarity, and mutual respect, and the final image is not a kiss or a promise spoken aloud, but two people standing side by side, facing the noise. Together, neither hiding nor dominating, simply staying. This story reminds us that sometimes the most powerful connections begin with a quiet request and grow through patience, honesty, and the courage to relinquish control, because real intimacy is not about being saved, it is about being seen and still being allowed to choose. If this story resonated with you, if it made you think about the spaces where you feel safest or the ways you show up for others, please consider liking this video, subscribing to our channel, and sharing it with someone who might need the reminder, because your support helps us continue telling stories that linger long after the screen goes dark.